All right. Well, good afternoon, investors. Welcome to the January 24th, 2023 edition of Bull Sessions. My name is Mark Robertson. I'm founder and managing partner of Manifest Investing, and I'm joined here by that investing raconteur from the north, Ken Kavula. We're going to get that raconteur label to stick.
I chuckle every time you say that, Mark. It's not sticking with anybody.
It's not
Okay.
sticking. We need
and that's just as fine. That's just as well. So let's
we
keep on a moving here.
we need options. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get underway. Winter has arrived. We'll show you more about that in Michigan here in a few minutes. But we are coming down to the final week and a half of the Groundhog Challenge. And we are headed for a photo finish. At least it appears that way in a couple of different categories. So we'll have some fun with that. We're not even going to talk about the 600-pound thing in the middle. Ken has requested that we not give that to be unnamed animal anymore impetus. But
or publicity or press. Okay.
One of the things that we do want to talk about a little bit is Apple's strategy of what we refer to as getting chippy. They're talking about bringing some of their sourcing for chips and screens or displays in-house. So we just want to talk about that for a few minutes. The gold coin is to remind everybody that this is the year of the rabbit, and it may be coming in a very timely and helpful way with respect to our best small companies. So we'll take a look at that just briefly. We're trying to kind of look the other way and let that stuff work its magic this year, Ken. And let's hope that it behaves. Then we'll spend a little bit of time with a couple of case studies. I find them to be kind of fascinating. I've dubbed it the circle of life, capitalism style, and you'll see why here in a few minutes. Anything else you want to kick around, Ken?
No, we have more than enough today, and we have a roundtable tonight. So let's get underway, Mark.
Yeah, and I thought I didn't have enough. The next thing you know, I've got too much again. 8 pounds in the 6-pound bag or whatever it is. Again, no investment recommendation is intended. A lot of familiar faces in the crowd. You know that we do this as an illustration or demonstration of principles, philosophies, methods, and techniques of the modern investment club movement. We'll be expressing our own interpretations and opinions. Please do your own homework before you make any decision about anything. If we happen to own something, we will try to remember to disclose that and share that with the audience. Tonight is the January Roundtable. It will start at 8:30 Eastern Time. If you're not familiar with the Roundtable, we invite you to come and check things out. We'll have 3 or 4 stocks to study in greater detail than we typically do at things like this. If you'd like to be added to our reminder list for the monthly Roundtable webcasts, please send an email to nkavula1@comcast.net, and we'll be happy to remind you anytime that we're doing one of those activities. Again, they're monthly, but sometimes we do special editions and that sort of thing. If you have any follow-up, including requests for the slides or topics or cues in seeking A's, our 2 email addresses are down there at the bottom. Anything else, sir?
No, we're usually on the last Friday of the month, folks. I'm sorry, the last Friday. We're usually on the last Tuesday of the month for the roundtable. We will be tonight. This is a special date for January, but we will go back to the last Tuesday in February, and that will actually be the last day of February, February 28th, if you're keeping a calendar. So join us. It's a great program. We've been doing it for a long time, and tonight is especially important because it's one of our anniversary programs, and Mark's going to announce some awards for us, I think.
Well, that's actually the February one, but we will, unless you want me to hand out awards tonight.
No, we don't want to. We'll wait for the awards. I can be patient.
We'll do a little more runtime first,
all right,
and pray for some of those solid performers that they hang in there for another month. All right, here's our look at the market, again, as characterized by the value line arithmetic average. That's the green bars. It's an index of the companies in the investment survey standard edition, graphed against the return forecast as represented by the median appreciation projection for the companies that are in the standard edition. And obviously the return forecasts fluctuate. So do the stock prices. And again, our never-ending theme is that blue trajectory, which is just a mathematical trend, is where we think over the long term things are going. And yes, the green bar is tickling the blue line again. And I do think it's noteworthy that the return forecast has subdued a little bit quickly there on the right-hand side. It's actually down to 11.6 as of the most recent update this weekend. So we are definitely back in. Most stocks are fairly valued or in the hold zone.
That's kind of odd to see a 1% move in just one update, isn't it, Mark?
It is, but I think a lot of it is the value line analysts catching up, checking their calculations. And, we did have an uptick in the market over the last few days.
Okay.
January
That
was
would,
a pretty good month.
yep, and that would move it down also, right?
It's the combination of the increase in the price combined with a little bit of moderation of the fundamentals for the companies in general. All right, pressing on. Here's our provocative Twitter post for the week. And it's a little bit twisted, but I think what Jeff Winiger is trying to get at, and Ken, you can tear into me if you want here. He basically took a look at the 20% of stocks with the highest PE ratios and compared them to the lowest quintile, the stocks with the lowest PE ratios, and basically said that what we have witnessed over the 10 years leading into COVID, he's talking about right here, has been this pretty dramatic, call it momentum, call it whatever you want, that is equal to or greater than what actually happened during that glory period in the late 1990s. And the way I took this, Ken, and then you can beg to differ. I think he's basically issuing a warning that could we be set up for another lost decade? That's kind of the way I interpreted it. Do you see it differently?
I do, Mark. I wonder about that 6.2 number up there in 2020. And the reason that I wonder about it is that I really would like to know what Jeff does with all of the companies that didn't have a PE. And to my mind, at least, with the preponderance of SPAC-driven companies in 2020, 2021, with the number of price to hope companies that didn't make a dime in that period of time, with the overall feeling that you could value a company by lots of different things that, in my mind at least, amounted to basically making excuses for the fact that they didn't make any money. I'm wondering that if you just threw those out of the balance, I would think that the scale would move a little bit higher towards the high PE companies because you have this big group that you're not even counting that would basically give more balance to the two groups if you gave them some numerical value, even if you gave them a numerical value of 0. But included them in your averages, I think that might change these percentages. I'd really want to dive into his methodology and find out how he's creating the graphs. I just want to remind our listeners that we can all draw a graph about almost anything we want and make it prove almost anything we want to prove by choosing our data very carefully. And that's, to me, that's what this feels like, just a little bit.
Well, it's certainly true, Ken. And come a few days from now, I'll be buying extra pizza and extra beer to improve my standings in the Groundhog.
Okay.
So when the accountants and when they
You
all
mean
sit down in the conference room,
your Groundhog standing going to take a real zoom up the ladder, you mean, Mark?
oh yeah, they're going to find some fascinating stuff.
Okay.
Anyhow. And then the quote on the right is just a quick reminder that we have talked about this a fair amount in the past. This came from Guru Focus this morning. And again, he's just lamenting the fact that there's an awful lot of emphasis on earnings, and hence some of the crazy PE stuff that we've seen here over the last few years. Ken was just basically talking about that just now. And in our work with projected return on value, you know that we de-emphasize. That doesn't mean we ignore earnings or PE ratios. We basically try to find a balance and focus on, again, the business. And that's what I believe he's talking about there. I would remind everybody in this audience who's familiar with the work of George Nicholson that the original stock selection guide didn't even graph earnings. So, I mean, that's just something to scratch your chin over and come to grips with that statement.
Mark, I've had people in Better Investing tell me that it's because I've become more experienced that I'm noticing how malleable earnings per share are in company to company that I study. But I happen to think that the whole concept of engineering earnings to try to match a particular kind of model or to try to match a particular set of numbers, I happen to think that's a lot more common today than it used to be. I can't remember seeing half or more of my companies offering alternative numbers to the numbers they report to the SEC or to the government. And today, I think that half or more of the companies that I study have a sheet in their annual report that shows you how they're balancing out pro forma numbers and all the other numbers that they're trying to deal with. Earnings have become very, very easy to manipulate, and I think you have to be real careful. That's why I like to go back to sales, and that preferred procedure might be an old chestnut, but boy, is it useful when you're trying to come up with estimating earnings without all of the pluses and minuses that companies try to throw at you to maybe make them a little bit more confusing than they really should be.
Absolutely. And again, it just gives more momentum and validity, in my opinion, to looking at that projected return on value that we do so much of. All right, here we are as we come down the home stretch. We do have a new leader. He happens to be one of us. Kurt Kowitz has taken over the lead from Lisa. It's a tight race. Kurt has so much fun with this. We'll probably be talking about him either tonight or a week from today. About his selection process takes less than 5 minutes a year. And he runs his personal finances with the same type of methodology. And it's almost frighteningly simple, and it seems to have been quite effective for him. But the real story for me is we skip right over number 7 and go down to the bolded group entries. We've had a different group leader each of the last 4 weeks. And there's a bunch of investment clubs that are kind of kicking around there. There's a whole bunch just under 41. And Ken, yes, I did put 41 on there just for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
But what I want the audience to notice is I've also included number 63 and 64. Those are our 2 cage match 3-time champion clubs. The Broad Assets out of St. Louis and Susan Michelik's club out of Bauer City, Janesville, Wisconsin. And they are only $600 apart. But I find it fascinating that the difference between number 41 and 63 is only $12,000. So that just tells you that there's 20-some in either individual investors or groups that are just barely off this list. So good, clean fun. And I'm not one of them, at least not until the accountants get duly lubricated with their adult beverages and pizza. Pretty fussy about their pizza, too. All right. Anything else here, Ken?
Nope. Let's keep on moving.
Do we want to talk about Cy being at number 30 and push him down to 40, or?
I don't like to talk about any of the Knights of the Round Table when they're moving in the wrong direction. So I would like to see Cy moving back up into the top 20 or the top 15 even, but he's moved down to number 30. It's been a pretty decisive pulling away of the floorboard so he can drop down here right at the moment.
I will simply point out that Herb Lemkool at number 10 is still lurking. And he's been at the top for the entire year. All right, here's just a quick reminder that we will be starting the contest. One ends, one begins on uh, Groundhog Day, February 2nd. This year's contest actually comes to an end at the same moment that the next one begins. That's the close of business on Groundhog Day. And there's some quotes there for you really quick, but we're going to basically do it exactly the same way. And the rules of engagement are pretty simple. We ask you to select a minimum of 5 investments and stick to a maximum of 20. By the way, the average number of picks, want to take a guess at the number of selections for last year, Ken? Do you remember?
I'm going to guess it's somewhere in 6, 7, 8, somewhere around in there.
It's right at about 8. And
8, yeah.
the most frequent number we are seeing so far this year is 10 selections. So people have decided to pretty much stay away from 20. And if you really want to give yourself a chance to win, I do think your probability goes up if you get in that 5 to 10 zone. So
probably moves in both directions if you only have 5, Mark, you know.
Well, yeah, you get a little more volatility, and I've experienced that this year.
Boom or bust.
We do welcome entries from clubs or individuals, and you're welcome to do that. There are no transactions permitted between Groundhog Day this year and Groundhog Day next year. Okay. My email address is there, or you can post them in the forum if you want to share your selections with everybody out there. And
before the question comes up, yes, dividends are included in the final total that's being reported for the winning positions.
Yeah, we use total return-based prices, which means that the dividends are included when we do the calculation. Okay. And just for a sample, this weekend, Barron's came out with the first half of their investing roundtable for this year. We have fairly regularly included Abby Cohen's picks, and she's actually got a pretty good track record. The 7 years where we have grabbed her Barron's roundtable selections, she's checking in at about 11%. I'm not going to complain about 11%. We might bring this back as a topic because in the comments and the notes, they're just completely unfair to not just Abby, but everybody on the Barron's roundtable. They actually came in collectively at about minus 4% this year. And again, we all know that the stock market is down, depending on how you measure it, anywhere from 14 to 18%. So coming in at minus 4 was actually pretty good, but apparently average investors can't appreciate that. Anyhow, those are her 5 selections for this year up on the upper right. I'm pretty confident that we haven't all heard of them all. Does that make sense, Ken?
Well, quite a few negatives in that sentence, but I think I understood it. Okay.
You can mathematically back out. I do think that there's a couple pretty interesting companies in here. I'm going to look at the entire list from this weekend, but Daikin is machinery and tools out of Japan, and it's got a fairly decent looking track record. Signify is an innovative light consumer light company out of the Netherlands. Delek happens to be oil and gas exploration related, but they also have a whole bunch of desalination type stuff that they do. So that's one of the reasons that Abby brought it up. So I would just recommend a closer look at that one too. All right. Here's the entire list of companies, and you'll see that Abby's are this group right here. Okay, these 5 here that are unshaded. And across the board, she's got some fairly decent return forecasts here. These are our consensus. Now, those are not Abby's numbers. And these are also pretty solid across the board. And she tends to be a little more conservative than most. But what you'll see there is Daikin probably has a fairly decent looking guide if you can get the data on the company. And Delek also, although it's a fairly new company, probably a little bit erratic and probably with a short track record. And of course, T. Rowe Price and Toyota are both familiar. Any questions or comments on those, Ken?
I'm just kind of comparing Prove to Par and suggesting that there's a few in there that might need a little bit of of fooling around with. Paramount Global, for example, about a little bit more than halfway down the list, has a par number that is almost twice that of its proved number. That might signify that the PEs that are being used to calculate that par are a little bit aggressive. But for the most part, there's a pretty decent correlation between prove and par on this list. That's surprising. Liberty Braves is another one where there's a real disconnect between par and prove, at par at 12.4 and prove down at 4.2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ones up at the top are from Scott Black. He's got a fairly decent kind of a vanilla track record up at those 4 selections up at the top. Sterling Construction, he puts out as an infrastructure play. We've mentioned them here before. Chubb is the insurance company. And Kim had picked that in the past for either the round table or one of our panel sessions. All of these here are Mario Gabelli in the light blue area here. And Mario Gabelli spends an awful lot of time in entertainment. And Ken, I think it might be something you dig up. You had presented, was it Caesars or Wynn, or was it one of the other ones?
Las Vegas Sands. I
Las
dug
Vegas
up
Sands, yeah.
a couple of times I presented it, but that had to be 5-6 years ago when Macau was really in its heyday. Macau is the gambling mecca for the Chinese mainland, and it suffered right along with the COVID lockdown. Macau suffered terribly. The 2 big names on Macau are Las Vegas Sands and Wynn Resorts, the two big non-Chinese names.
Yeah, and part of Gabelli's thesis is that Macau is going to come back big, and it might be worth taking a look at. Paramount, of course, has Yellowstone. That's all you probably need to know. Pretty good track record of putting out some programs lately, but might be a little bit inflated. And he came back with his oil field services companies again. He pretty much alternates between them every year. The final 6 names on this list happen to belong to Bill Priest, and he's got a good track record, and quite often is going to align with our type of thinking. He's got a kind of a special situation down there with Airbus. I'm sure Matt Spielman could give us quite some notes on that, but everything else here is fairly conventional. You know, right down to the quality numbers and proved numbers. So I think Bill Priest. Go ahead, Ken.
One of the more interesting studies that you can do, folks, if you're looking for ideas, a study on ASML is a really, really interesting study. If you're looking for a way to make an investment in computer chips and maybe computer chip technology, without at the same time trying to pick which computer chip is going to be superior, ASML technology is in almost every single chip in the entire world that's being manufactured. So ASML is a Dutch company. You might take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, I picked Roche for the round table about 12 years ago. It is still an active holding in the round table, and I think it's beaten the market by just a slice, but fairly decent returns over those 12 years. All right. Here's our reminder that it is the year of the rabbit, and after the last year, we're actually ready for a year of the rabbit, and things are working out pretty much okay so far. Ken and I do like the fact that there's a whole lot of green here. We're more used to seeing more green here.
Well, what I'm happy about, Mark, is that y-axis scale. When we started the graph at the beginning of our choices here on November 1st, that scale was $20 difference between every one of the lines, and it's moved up to $50 difference. I would love to see that scale move up to $100 difference so that we can fit it on the slide. So that's I think that's a really good indicator that at the moment things are going quite swimmingly for this particular list.
I do want to say that I'm stunned to hear you say that, because that's probably the kiss of death for us.
Probably. Okay.
And yes, for those of
Uh,
you Monty Python fans are out there, noticing that that is the rabbit from Monty Python. Many of you know why I'm chuckling. And it may be a white rabbit in that picture, but it wasn't by the time they were done with that particular movie.
I will say, Mark, that either our audience just doesn't have time to react to a request that we make, or there isn't much that can be said. But we did ask a couple weeks ago for any negative information that people could feed us on Technoglass. We had read some very negative reporting by a short seller, and wanted to kind of double check that whole concept and see if we could get any verification of any of that negative stuff. And to date, I have not received a single thing from anybody pointing me in the direction of negative news other than the original article itself.
Mm-hmm. Same here. So maybe it is just somebody trying to dump it down. All right, pressing on. Here's a quick look at Yeti. They did report. They're part of this week's update batch, so basically threw it out there. Again, fairly early stage, but there's enough meat on the bone here that you can probably get a pretty good look at the company. What I mean by that, Ken, is there is a blue line down here. There's actually stuff down here, so we can actually warm up to it a bit.
It's really appreciated, that blue line, yeah.
and this is a pretty formidable trend when it comes to total sales. And I am here to report that Wendy has lost at least 2 more within the last week or so. So we continue to be in the replacement market. So pretty steady customers.
Well, I have children in their 40s and grandchildren in their 20s, all the way down to in their primary years. And Yeti was the most requested Christmas gift on any of the lists that I received this year. It seems to be extremely popular in people that don't normally pay that much attention to brand names when they're asking for gifts. So that's just an anecdote. It can't be proven, but I happen to own Yeti in one of the clubs that I belong to, and boy, have we been happy with that investment. We bought it at the low in the last year, and it's just done a really nice move upward since the purchase.
Yeah, we owned it, and then we sold it as they kind of reached their early breakout peak after coming public, and they're back down to the levels where we sold it. So, or actually first bought it the first time around. So we might be taking a look at that one too. I may bring Yeti tonight to the round table. Haven't decided yet.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and kick around this Apple thing for just a minute. Nothing hardcore, a lot of anecdotal stuff here, but just as a reminder, Apple is still the most widely followed company by our community. It's been in that number 1 position for a number of years. They've actually made pretty good inroads in the cell phone market, I would say, Ken. It's a massive number. So the iPhone is extremely strategic to Apple. And the point that we had made is that they were evaluating not just changes in geographical location of some of their plants, but actually taking in-house some of the chip stuff, and then, as we'll see on the next slide, some of the screen stuff. So it's definitely something you want to keep your finger on the pulse of as a shareholder in Apple. I do wonder, Ken, if we had looked at Broadcom and the merger that they were doing fairly recently. I don't think we talked about any impact from Apple actually canceling out or changing some of their sourcing direction here. Do you recall if we had talked about that at all?
I don't think we had about Broadcom, but we had a number of discussions, not anything major, about Qualcomm,
Right.
and how Apple was going to to work its way through. Qualcomm won a lawsuit against Apple and changed a little bit the dynamic of what Apple had to pay for Qualcomm technology. And we did speak a number of different times about how Qualcomm will be impacted going forward. 22% of its sales coming from Apple, that might, I don't know how much of that is coming from patented things and how much of that is coming from things that Apple could just simply replace.
Yeah, it should be fascinating to see what the net is on Qualcomm. I'm pretty sure they ended up paying a slightly higher royalty rate than they thought was right. So, and I'm sugarcoating that. So, and then here's
I'm as Mark moves to this slide right here, I'm going to suggest that you notice the absence of anybody talking about this movement from Apple impacting a company called Universal Display. Universal Display happens to have a ticker of OLED, but OLED is also a type of computer chip, an organic light emitting diode to be exact. And Universal Display has so much of that technology tied up in long-term patents that I think it would be very interesting to see if Apple's move, while it's definitely would impact Samsung, LG, Sharp, and some of the other manufacturers, it would be very interesting to see what impact it would have on Universal Display. Universal Display is characterized as the gorilla in the room when it comes to developing screen technology, and they're way out ahead of anybody else in developing new types of screens and new uses for these different diodes that they're creating. I was talking with Mark before this began that one of the big pushes right now is to create these diodes. They've discovered that different kinds of diodes use different types of power, different amounts of power. And so the rush is on now to find the diodes that use the least power. And the upshot of that whole thing is you use less power in your screen and your battery lasts for a longer time. And I think that's the direct benefit to consumers at that point then.
that would be my take on it too. I mean, I think most people are pretty satisfied with the images on their cell phones and watches. I don't, especially with my old eyeballs, I can't imagine needing a lot of improvement there. I wouldn't be able to see it in the first place. But I do have to plead guilty to, I'm probably the one who laid that OLED thing out there. I was doing it as a teaser. I was basically saying when Apple is doing this type of thing, which can be disruptive to a number of companies, if I were a shareholder, I am a shareholder of Universal Display, that ticker OLED. One of the questions I would want to ask and get an answer to is, does this affect me, or what type of things might we see going forward? Now that did lead me to this topic. We'll spend a few moments with that. What in the world is that? First time I'd ever heard of it. And I know some of you nerds out there are well versed on this. The other thing that I discovered as I was reading some of the literature is Apple is notorious for doing something like this. Like they are definitely close to releasing some of their MacBook and some of that type of stuff. And that's already taken possible supply away from Samsung, for example. But what they sometimes will do, and they're notorious for this, they will begin to produce it in-house, and then they will basically reposition it back with perhaps even the company that they originally took it away from. And I'm doing air quotes again, Ken. So it is kind of a natural shift when it comes to Apple, and the people who pay attention to this industry see it as such. So again, if Samsung sees a bunch of their stuff yanked off the table, it can come back, maybe partially, but it can come back.
Our audience, a number of people in our audience, Mark, have also suggested that Apple's move to its own chips and some of its own design will greatly impact Skyworks. I know that Skyworks does a large percentage of its business with Apple, and people in our audience at least feel that Skyworks will also be greatly impacted if Apple follows through on some of these things.
Definitely something to take a look at. And here's just some more information. Again, Apple has their next quarterly conference call on Groundhog Day at 5 o'clock. So as I'm gathering with the adult beverages and pizza, we can also listen in on Apple on Groundhog Day. So again, this just gives some of that other information. Ken had said he knew about the chips, but was not aware of going after the screens. This kind of lays it out, some of the stuff that they're thinking about. So it's actually the single largest cost component that they can go after and try to optimize a little bit. As far as this micro LED, I'd never heard of it, but that's because I haven't been going to the Consumer Electronics Show for the last couple of years. Probably would have seen this if I had. Literally, they're just shrinking down the size of the individual pixel components into it's just kind of a fascinating process. And the end game is just simply better picture quality, and then, as we'll see, energy savings. Here's an article from The Verge regarding Apple and what they might be thinking of, because they've actually touted this micro LED, and I don't know if this has any more impact on universal display at all, Ken. Does the micro LED do anything? And again, I'm just talking out loud here. I do not know. I have not looked at it in any way to see if there's any disruption there. But
I'd be interested in finding out, Mark, also if there's any tie-in to the cameras that are so important to these phones. The quality of the camera, especially. I know that's being used as a marketing point for a number of companies right now. The quality and the versatility of the camera that they have on their phone is becoming a real big deal in some manufacturers.
Yeah, and that link at the bottom, that's what the photograph was actually, the image was taken from. The guy describes himself as a docent, and then he takes you through an update on what this micro LED is. And he's actually with Samsung. And the other point I wanted to make is the article was silent about battery life. But if you go into the comments, they basically, a bunch of people who obviously have technology skills, jump in and say, this is kind of the big deal here. And as Ken has already suggested, he suspected that this is a very large driver to this whole process and what seems to be unfolding.
Matt Spielman out there in our audience is also suggesting that micro LEDs might be a real big deal as these things move to contact lenses and glasses and headsets and things like that for gaming systems, that it might be something that will get a lot of play as you make that transition to those kind of what do you call them, $64,000 man kind of things, to help us all become superhumans.
Yeah, and again, I'm the guy who said, how in the world, how is Google ever going to make money? How will Google ever be monetized? So that, please bear that in mind as you listen along. But I would say go to that and kind of dream a little bit. They actually go to the point where they tell you some of these micro LEDs actually have speaker as an audio speaker capability. And there's just a whole lot of stuff going on there that certainly worth paying some attention to. And again, I'm the guy who said, who would ever want to listen to music on your computer? All right, switching gears to our last subject for the day. I just kind of thought this was kind of cool. This is from Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and he basically asked this question: what three companies are worthy of study by an analyst? And I thought the three selections were kind of interesting. I am personally connected to all of them, so maybe I'm a little bit too embedded in this situation. I actually am sitting here right now fondling Not kidding. I have a Lotus 123 box right here sitting on my desk. So, Ken, go ahead and call me a dinosaur.
I'm just going to remain dumbstruck by the whole concept. Okay.
All right. So, Lotus 123, for especially for you millennials that have never heard of it. Sean actually had to look it up this morning, Ken. I'm really embarrassed. I was one of the clingers to Lotus. I mean, manifest investing was actually born on a Lotus spreadsheet. So that ought to give you some idea how far back it goes. But what Patrick is basically saying is take a look at Lotus. You know, what happened with Lotus, and there might be some things you can learn there when it comes to understanding the life cycle of a company and how you analyze it along the way, etc. Oracle, another company I was actually fairly close to. In my days in Chicago at Booz Allen, there were Oracle people amongst us, including Larry Ellison. And it's just fascinating to see what an early adoption type enterprise, as they were back then, along with many evolutions of technology, but they basically have become a force and remain a force in a lot of the enterprise software solutions that are out there. So it's kind of fascinating to watch this. They've been reinventing themselves. Some would argue that Lotus did not reinvent itself when it needed to, and what happened to them. And then Compuware is another case study recommended here. That was a formidable company out of Detroit. We featured them on Better Investing magazine back around the turn of the century. It was just kind of fascinating to watch this company kind of evaporate a bit, ultimately taken private and basically no longer exists in the form that we previously knew it. But just some real interesting lessons that could be garnered from taking a look at all three of these companies. Here's the first one that I think is kind of cool. Oh, and by the way, I didn't know that there's a Lotus 123 day. So Ken, on Thursday, I'm going to be giddy.
Okay.
If I could only figure out how to get if I could take my Lotus software out of this box and get it to run again on a computer.
Okay.
You don't care.
I'm just not sure what you would do on Lotus 123 Day, but maybe you could suggest some activities.
Well, I could. Never mind. It is a Lotus
While
123 Day. We will be celebrating that in some way, shape, or form.
While we're talking about that, Mark, I would like to suggest a fourth company and then a fifth maybe idea.
Okay.
The fourth company I'd like to suggest is Adobe,
Sure.
and how a company that basically began with just simple document presentation and document preparation has really cornered the market in anything to do with documents and publishing, and how it's maintained its superior lead in that area over years and years and years now of competition from lots of companies that have tried and failed to stand up to them and compete with them. And then the fifth thing I'd like to suggest a study on is the cage match that went on in the late 80s and early 90s between the beginning computer companies. I mean, you could throw companies like Radio Shack and Compaq and Dell and even Apple into that mix. I mean, we forget that Apple was
How about
fighting
Gateway?
tooth and nail. We studied Apple and saw how it almost disappeared as a company in the mid 90s after kind of losing out on the computer matches to some other competitors that then lost out to other competitors. That cage match is still partially going on today, even with Hewlett Packard and some of the other competitors. So I think that when you get a disruptive concept that has far-reaching implications for the entire planet, I think you also get a situation with the companies behind them when you're asking yourself, who's on first and who's going to end up winning the race when the whole thing is done. It was a very interesting time to be an investor and to try to get a piece of that market without being crushed.
That's I'll second that motion. I threw Gateway on the pile too. Gateway Computer.
Yeah.
People don't even remember the cow tipping company. All right. So Lotus Thursday, Lotus 123 day, everybody. All right. Here's the one thing that there's a major takeaway with this Lotus thing, and I was not alone as a clinger on type, not a Klingon, a clinger on user of this product because it came out in the early 1980s. Excel arrived on the scene in the late 1980s, and you can see by the red graph what happened with Excel. Well, what to me is very fascinating is Lotus basically abandoned all support and any product upgrades sometime in here. I don't remember when, but sometime around 1993. And you can see that their market share didn't go down very fast. I mean, the market share was still kicking and breathing on the right hand side of this chart. And then you look down here, there was still a fairly significant presence as little as 10 years ago with Lotus usage. So the interesting thing about that is, again, this dynamic of once you're in position, and you've heard us talk about this in terms of the shelf space in a grocery store. Shelf space in the grocery store is a magical thing because once you get it, whether you're Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or one of those wannabes or anything else, I think it came up during the A2 milk discussion where they had actually broken through. I'm not sure that's lasting, but shelf space matters, and people will tend to retain a solution like this until they're forced to make a change. In some cases, brokerages can tend to think about this one in terms of acquisition cost of new investors, because once we land someplace, once we become comfortable and trust a solution, we don't go away very quickly. So again, a major difference here between Quattro, which I don't even remember, and what happened to Lotus. I mean, it did not disappear overnight. Anything to add, Ken?
Well, nothing except, Mark, that I think the smartest thing that Microsoft ever did was to bundle all of its packages together and then offer them to secondary and middle schools at outrageously low prices, along with an IBM PC to run them on, and to get people used to the idea, used to the concept that there was a suite of tools and you didn't have to go outside that suite to do a lot of different work. I can remember getting my first IBM PC as part of my job as a high school principal in 1987, late 87, the September or October of that year, and getting this package of tools that could be used right along with it. And at that point, my Lotus wasn't used very often. I was a Lotus user at that point. And once I had Excel and it was all tied to everything else, Excel became my tool of choice. And it became the only tool that a lot of young people growing up were exposed to. And that exposure led to what Excel is today. I think 90% plus of all users are Excel users.
So do you remember VisiCalc?
I do remember VisiCalc, to be honest with you, Mark. I'm trying to think what it became, what it was bundled with. It might have been bundled with my first Radio Shack machine, or it might have been something that I bought to go with the Heathkit machine that I built. But I do remember VisiCalc at one point, and you could see what it had the potential to do. The problem was it just couldn't do a lot of it at the time that you were dealing with it.
I can remember. Must have been on the Apple II Plus was what I would remember from VisiCalc.
That Len is telling us that VisiCalc was on an Apple. I did have an Apple II as well, so I went through a lot of machines searching for one that was magic, and then discovered none of them were magic. You just had to work at it.
Right. So I went to when it comes to Compuware, again, we had featured Compuware as a stock to study at Better Investing Magazine back many, many years ago. And I went and searched for it. We ever talked about it at Manifest Investing. And I actually found an old article. Unfortunately, it was when it was discontinued as a ticker. So hence the gravestone. So this was Compuware, and they really did have a heck of a good run. Very strong company in the Detroit area, very respected. Their client list was fabulous back over the years, and just one of those type of situations. I did find an old slideshow put together by them, and the topic was mobility presentation, and the link is down at the bottom. It's kind of fascinating to look at the quality of their work, but then I consider this to be kind of a case study within a case study. Take a look at this one, guys. Again, this is a Compuware slide talking about Blockbuster versus Netflix. Keep in mind that Blockbuster was offered Netflix, I believe the legend is for $10 a share, and they said no. And I think that was probably a mistake based on what we see here. That was probably an oops.
Might have been, you think, Mark? Okay.
You
We
know,
have a couple folks, Mark, also reminding us of Quattro Pro and Word Perfect. George Mackey is telling us, do
yes,
you remember Quattro Pro and Word Perfect as well? Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, this is an intense example of disruptive innovation, and who would have thought those Blockbuster stores could have disappeared as they did? I'm pretty sure there's one physical brick and mortar Blockbuster left on the planet. Last time I checked, and Netflix continues going strong, and kind of interesting to watch how entire thing has taken place. But boy, you talk about one company, they attempted to adapt. You know, when you look at some of the stuff here, and this note here where they basically eliminated the pursuit of a Netflix type solution. That didn't
Mark,
go off very
I'm gonna give you a start of maybe a new search, but Marcia Cooey from Oregon
well. Mm-hmm.
indicates that in March 2020, Compuware was acquired by BMC Software,
Oh yeah, I'm aware. Yes,
and today you can still get Compuware products available if you go to the BMC Compuware site, and they're still maintaining an office in Detroit.
they are. In fact, their office, they moved from downtown Detroit back to Southfield out in Oakland County. At one time, they had the kind of the marquee building on the square, the campus square downtown. But they have moved out of that building, and there is a shell of the operation. I think they have about 10% of the employees they had back in their heyday, but they still are out there. They were taken private, and then BMC got involved. And I believe that still is the case today. All right. And this is just a tribute to Don Quixote. I happen to think that looks a little bit like Sean Connery. I should probably switch to a Sean Connery voice here. No, the thing with Compuware that's kind of fascinating as a case study, and don't want to get too reckless in my comments here, so I'll just sugarcoat. The leader of the company was notorious for being overly aggressive with the Wall Street analysts whenever they'd have their quarterly meetings, basically questioning their competence and work ethic and everything else. And I actually have a colleague who's one of his unwritten job responsibilities was to attempt to reel this executive in whenever he misbehaved. And so whatever legends are out there, there's some truth to that. And shortly after the company was featured in Better Investing as a stock to study, I'll just say that he allegedly went on a tirade for several consecutive analyst meetings, and it was reflected in the stock price. I'll just leave it at that. So it's kind of an interesting case study how a completely functional, viable company can kind of go off the rails.
So now, Mark, here's the bonus question for you for next week, okay?
All right.
What's the name of the other guy in the picture, and what's the name of his donkey? Okay.
Well, I always thought it was Sancho.
Well, you only get partial credit. You need the full name here.
Sancho Panza.
There we go. You got half of it right. Now we need the name of the donkey. Okay.
Well, leave it to our audience.
I'm looking to see if our audience can come up with the correct name. If not, there's a homework assignment for everybody here. Oh, I'll bet you, Len, did you look it up on the internet? Come on.
He looked up on one of his old VisiCalc spreadsheets.
I'm not going to spoil it for everybody else, but
right.
Len is probably smiling. Okay.
To identify the donkey. All right. In one last case study, it's one slide. This, by the way, is a stock selection guide, if you want to think of it that way, because you have a multi-decade picture of revenues up at the top for Oracle, followed by a section two-way. It's a different flavor, but the profitability as measured by that level of profitability over time. And you can see fairly dramatic consistency if you take this part out. I have no idea what these numbers are. Probably numbers because they had to report something, but ignore them. But this is a company that basically operated between 40 and 50% for this level of margin for 20, 30 years. And I think we can see an inflection point here. I mean, this growth rate is obviously more rapid than this growth rate, but those are both pretty consistent. And then looking at the long-term price action on the company, pretty formidable. By the way, this goes pretty well with the charts we were putting up earlier, Ken, about the high PE stocks of the late 1990s. There's one of them.
Absolutely.
Going into launch mode. That's an accident. We didn't plan that. But Oracle has been pretty rewarding. I will personally take credit for bringing it as the undervalued stock back in that time frame. And it was the highest return percentage when we did the results at the end of that period. I think we did either 12 or 18 months from that time frame. And I introduced this concept to the Securities Review Committee of the kitchen sink in late 1998. And that basically Oracle was piling anything negative into the kitchen sink and basically flushing their earnings so that from there going forward, it would be okay. You can actually look it up on Wikipedia, look up the phrase kitchen sink as it applies to investing. So kind of a rather dramatic track record over the years. Again, nothing to sneeze at here. And this company has, and those of you that have worked in the IT field know that this company has basically rolled over and reinvented itself with respect to the type of platforms and the programming languages and all that stuff that I don't play with every day, so I don't know them, but I do know that they have been very progressive at evolving and changing over the years. Any other thoughts, Ken?
No, no.
Okay, so with that, we do have a roundtable to put together for this evening. And just wanted to give you the constant reminder that we do have all of these sessions archived on YouTube under the Manifest Investing page. So you're invited to go there and check things out. Send your friends and family there to subscribe also, and we'll let you know anytime new content is added. Here's a reminder that we're probably within the next month or so going to tackle these two books. It's an interesting study. Tillinghast is one of the legendary managers of a fund at Fidelity, and Annie Duke is a heck of a poker player. Our picture for this week, proof that Michigan is in winter now. That is me on the left there, along with my spouse. That's in honor of Yeti, by the way. Ice sculptures at our local Fire and Ice Festival. And then the picture on the right is a picture that was shared, obviously satellite photography by Susan Michelik. And this right here pretty much captures the type of winter that Susan has experienced so far in south central Wisconsin, which would be right down here. But I'm just saying snow, all kinds of snow. Quick reminder, a little bit of a month, more than a month out, we will gather for our roundtable. That will be our awards session, Ken. Black tie event.
Okay, great.
And then just a little snippet to kind of warm everybody up for it. If you take a look at the average relative return for the stuff we've done over the last year, probably don't want to dwell on that too much. We don't want to scare that away either, but that's a pretty good number. Probably talk about that a little bit tonight, just a little. And with that, I think we're good, Ken, unless you've got anything else you want to kick around.
No. Okay. No. I have some directions to me. They want me, if I'm going to present a certain stock, to address something. And I'll let folks in the audience know that my presentation is already complete, and I still have a ticker talk to write before the presentation tonight. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to go back and do what you're asking me to do. With that said, I think we'll say good night, and we hope that we talk to a lot of you this evening, right?
All right. Take care, everybody. See you next time.